In this video, I'm going to delve into and examine some of the ideas presented in a TED Talk that I recently watched. The talk is titled Unmasking Masculinity and is subtitled Helping Boys Become Connected Men. So without further ado, let's begin.
So I want to begin with a little-known historical turning point that happened about 800 years ago in 13th century Europe. Now at that time, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II of Germany was in power, and was known to be uncharacteristically scientifically minded for a pope during the Middle Ages. And he was curious about what the natural language of God would be. And so he wondered, if we didn't speak to infants, if they didn't hear adult language, what would just emerge naturally? And really, this is an empirical question. You can put this to a test. And back at that time, he thought, being what he was, he thought it might be Hebrew as the first language, or it could be Latin or Greek. I suspect there were European kings elsewhere who might beg to differ. Right? But at that time in history, it was not uncommon for women to die during childbirth. And so these infants would be raised in these large orphanages by wet nurses. So he devised a simple experiment. Took about 20 infants, and these were the instructions. All they were to be was to have their basic needs met: fed, clothed, diapers changed. Under no circumstances were the caregivers allowed to interact with them, talk with them, cuddle, play, do all the things that we would expect with infants. The experiment was a dismal failure. By accounts written by a monk at the time, all of them were dead within several weeks.
So a bunch of babies died from lack of social interaction, even though all their other needs were met. I'm a little skeptical about that because there's been crimes where people have literally done that, to a child, stored them away in a basement for like 15 years. They didn't die after 2 weeks of non-social interaction. So if the claim here is that if people's other needs are met besides the social aspect, that they'll just die, I'm not sure about that.
Right, we know the importance of connection, so much so that even neonatal intensive care units have changed their practices from 50 years ago. Right now they encourage contact between the parent and these sensitive children because it reduces health complications, decreases time spent in hospital, and improves development across the board.
Yeah, so socializing young children is a good thing. Are we not doing that today, in today's day and age? I think we are.
Right, so we learned from that story about the richness and importance of social connection. And after that, I have to show you this picture, right, so you feel good.
Well, speaking as an emotionless man, pictures of cute baby animals do not make me feel better at all.
Speaking about emotional attachment, these are pygmy marmosets who are born in twin pairs. And the metabolic challenge is so great by the mother to feed them that the males often have to kick in and do a substantial amount of caregiving. So much so that even non-related males will come in and they'll carry these babies around. All right, this is attachment at its finest.
Attachment at its finest. So is that the ideal that us humans should live up to? I mean, are you just going to run over to some other guy's kid and be like, I'm going to take care of you, whether you like it or not? I'm a complete stranger.
And I want to make some arguments that, we socialize boys away from attachment.
I'm listening.
Now, back to the story about the importance of connection in both physical and mental health.
Oh, so the arguments come later. I see.
We have study after study after study that shows us very clear evidence on the role of social connectedness.
Yes, social connectedness is important. Now, I'd like for you to inform me about how men are socialized to be less socially connected by society.
And actually, research suggests infant boys are actually more expressive in both range and intensity than infant females. And interestingly, if you watch a group of 2 or 3-year-olds at play, both boys and girls, you see this wide range of negative and positive emotions. Right? And it's actually kind of hard to distinguish between the two.
So if there are studies that show that infant men, or boys I should say, or infant males, whatever you want to call them, have more intense emotions and a wider range of emotions than infant girls, I'd like to know how that's being measured. And there's really no indication. I can't refer back to a source because it's not in the YouTube description, nor does he cite it in his slides, nor does he cite it in his speech. So I'm a little skeptical about that.
But the stories start to change over time. Right around age 6, when they get into kindergarten, these paths start to diverge. Now, if we fast forward into adolescence and young adulthood, we start to see a new pattern.
So as men and women grow up, their emotional behavior diverges. I wonder if the sexual maturing process has anything to do with that.
Back in 1987, someone by the name of Long came up with this male emotional funnel system. So we all come into the world with a full range of vulnerable emotions. You can see some of them there behind me. Fear, shame. But over time, we teach our boys to rechannel them into anger and aggression. And it's not that we like these displays, but we tolerate them and sometimes even accept them in our...
So the idea here is that, we have this range of emotions that we feel, but men are taught to take this large variety of emotions and distill them down into anger. And I take issue with that because I think it's just the case that men are more aggressive. They have more aggressive thoughts more often. It's not that they're taking, let's say, like he has on the slide there, fearful. It's not like you're just taking fear and turning it into anger. You can actually just experience anger. And maybe men experience that at a higher rate.
But what you don't know and you don't see is that half second before anger came. And I'm going to make the argument this is the true primary emotion. Right? If we feel shame, anger rises up to defend against it. Right? So I'm really interested in what's happening in that moment right before.
So I'm not denying that there's defense mechanisms that people develop over time against certain emotions that they find uncomfortable. But I'm having a hard time relating that to men in general. Like men do that more often or they're more prone to it. There's probably plenty of women who, like, a thought will arise, they'll feel ashamed of it and they'll force it down, not be candid about the nature of that thought. I think that's pretty gender neutral.
With this remarkable photo. All right, we teach boys that it's not okay to be vulnerable, it's not okay to be hurt.
One thing that I'm finding pretty personally annoying about this presentation is he keeps bringing in art as if it's supposed to provoke some profound meaning or thought in the audience. I think it's not very explanatory of what he's trying to talk about, to be honest. Like, here's a guy with a tape over his mouth, so okay, yeah, he can't be candid about his emotions. Who's putting the tape there? Apparently society is. But from what I can observe, a lot of male mentors that I've been around don't preach you can't be vulnerable. They're like, it's okay to be vulnerable, but we also want to have control at the same time. So I'm having a hard time agreeing with the statement, we teach men to not be vulnerable.
Right, but it's okay to cover that up with either anger or silence. The problem with that is if we take that over the lifespan, the more we do that, the less connected we are with our own emotional states, and we can actually lose our ability to detect those subtle changes in our emotions. And if we extend it one more layer, we also then over time lose or impair our ability to detect those and respond to those in others as well.
So yes, if your only two emotions are anger and indifference, it's going to be pretty hard for you to relate with other people, create a social connection, and you'll probably be outcast. I just don't understand. That's like a pathology. That's a problem with an individual. I don't see how that's the case with men in general.
We have this giant forebrain, and we can make these decisions. We can say, you know what? I just broke up with this individual. Right? I'm never going to get hurt again. I'm never going to be vulnerable. I'm never going to show weakness.
So I doubt that people are using the rational part of their brain when they tell themselves that because of a breakup, they're not going to ever be emotionally vulnerable again. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. So again, I think that's more emotion feeding into yet more emotions.
So I had a male client in his late 30s, came to his first session just angry, aggressive, a history of violence. I didn't want to work with him. Right off the bat, I knew that. But a couple sessions in, I found out he had just an incredibly tragic trauma history. He himself had been a victim of severe physical abuse. He had perpetrated physical abuse. He had polysubstance addiction, had declared bankruptcy, several failed relationships. But all he ever showed was anger. There was no hurt, right? There was no sadness, just anger every time. And a couple sessions in, he said to me, "You know what? I know what you're trying to get me to do, and I'm not going to do it. I haven't cried in 25 years, and I'm not going to start now." And I said, "Look, to be honest with you, I don't care whether you cry or not, right? But my goal is to help you get in touch with what you're experiencing. And if that involves crying, then so be it." But I said, I was really curious. I said, "So what do you find so aversive about the idea of crying?" And he looked me straight in the eye, dead serious, and said, "I'm afraid that if I start, I'm going to crawl up in a fetal position and never be able to stop." So that told me he was well aware of what he was masking and controlling in that situation. Now you can probably suspect where the story's going to go, right? About 8 weeks after that, came in, we're having a session, and all of a sudden the tides changed, and here he was, and he just wept openly for the first time in 25 years in front of a man, no less. Right? There was no anger, there was no shame, it was just calmness and stillness. And I was actually very emotionally moved as well. And at the end of it, he kind of, once it was kind of all over, he looked really relaxed, and he looked up to me and he kind of smiled and he goes, "Huh, now I see why people do that." Right? But I had a little turning point then. I said, you know what, if being the man therapist means that I can be part of this journey with these individuals, then sign me up. This is something I want to do professionally.
So you had a client with a lot of problems, and you were able to work through those problems by having him be emotionally vulnerable. Now, is your claim then that society taught that man to be that way, or is this just an individual that has problems? So it's confusing because it seems like what you're trying to do is you take this one case and extend it to men in general, like we're all conspiring in this society that tries to suppress men's emotions.
Right. Social change doesn't require this massive organized movement. I mean, all it requires is each one of us to make one small change in our lives, right? To get people to respond in a different way, right? To put down this mask.
So here I expect we're going to get some really sage advice about how we can stop society from shoving men's emotions down into the bottomless pit of their souls.
Very well that there are places that we find ourselves where that emotional control and restriction is called for and it's necessary.
So here he's making sense, and he has made sense in other parts of the video, but there's mainly what I've been dealing with is the contentious points from my perspective.
But changing this doesn't have to be complicated. I came up with 2 simple tips for us just to even start with. One is, let's eliminate phrases like "man up,"
"Shut up, you pussy,"
"boys will be boys," "stop acting like a girl."
I really doubt the effectiveness of this suggestion. I don't think men are going to stop saying these things, and in certain contexts it actually is encouraging. So for example, if I'm out with the guys and we're doing something like a rock climbing or something, typical male bullshit, and one of them says, "Hey, man up, you need to jump this gap or something," then that might encourage me to actually challenge myself and accomplish something. So it's not as if these phrases are always bad all the time.
The second point is, let's redefine what it means to be courageous. And if you think about it, it doesn't require courage to hide behind a mask. Right? What requires courage is to be open and vulnerable no matter what.
So take the chance to be more honest about yourself with people. Thanks for sticking through this video with me. We might see you next time. We might not. There might not be a next time. But this has been Kellen Riley speaking, and thanks for having me.